Gentleman from Minnesota.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman Bernanke, I was just curious, I'll ask this question. Recognizing that we and the market have been having difficulty valuing assets on major banks on the balance sheets, you know, my constituents and I certainly have heard a lot about the whole issue of mark-to-market accounting recently, about the suspension potentially of that accounting mechanism as a possible method of addressing the banking crisis. Could you just discuss, maybe from your perspective, some of the pros and the cons of why mark-to-market might be a good idea to suspend, or regarding implementation of the policy, for what period, and just some thoughts on that?
Certainly, as I discussed earlier, the basic idea of mark-to-market accounting is very attractive. The idea that wherever there are market values determined in free exchange, that those market values should be used in valuing assets so that investors would have a more accurate sense of what the institution is worth. So that's the principle, and it's a good principle in general. Going very back to the beginning of this change in the accounting rules, however, the Federal Reserve had reservations about the fact that some assets, such as individual C&I loans, for example, don't trade frequently in markets, and therefore are much more difficult to value on a mark-to-market basis. This problem has become much more severe recently because many assets that were at one point traded in markets now no longer are, because those markets have dried up, are illiquid, or are not functioning in any serious way. So we've heard a lot of concern about are some assets being misvalued, either too high or too low, based on the use of mark-to-market modeling or mark-to-market asset valuations. There's no simple answer to that question. I don't think that there's any real appetite among the accounting authorities, for example, for suspending mark-to-market accounting, because there's still a great deal of valuable information in the market values that is useful to investors. At the same time, the accounting authorities have recognized that the mark-to-market principles don't work very well for some assets in situations with liquid markets, and they have promised to issue guidance. They've issued some guidance about how to address those situations. So I think it's important for them to continue to think about appropriately advising banks about how to value assets that are not frequently traded, and how those valuations ought to appear on the income and balance sheet statements of the banks. So there's some real challenges there, and I think the accounting authorities have a great deal of work to do to try to figure out how to deal with some of these assets which are not traded in liquid markets. But I don't see a suspension of the whole system as being constructive, because there is a great deal of information in valuing many of these assets according to market principles.
Well, and Mr. Chairman, that helps me from the perspective of someone who's a mathematics major and understands there's necessary for accounting purposes, that it's a difficult situation if you did go back on it. And I think this is going to be a conundrum for the committee or for us as we continue to deal with new circumstances and the new situation. We're in an uncharted territory, and so I hope that this is something this committee is going to be able to look at with thoughtfulness in terms of doing it in the right manner and the right way, so that we're being more prospective looking down the road. Thank you very much.
Thank the gentleman. Finally,